Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Former Exercise Podcast. Before we get started, I want to let you know that you can support the show by going over to jkramergraphics.com and picking up an item. We also do discounts for group orders, so if you're looking, your unit, your business, whatever, is looking to do a large purchase, reach out and I'll send you a discount code. That allows you to also let everyone order individually. That way you're not stuck like collecting money, making rosters for sizes, colors, and all the other stuff. You know, that's the worst part about it. I remember doing it when I was in. Also, we offer free shipping on orders of $75 or more. And as always, if you're looking for a custom design for your unit, then reach out and we can facilitate that as well. So again, support the show. Go over to jkramergraphics.com and let's get to it. When you joined, what was your goal? Did you want to, you joined as an infantryman, right? Did you want to get into combat right off the bat or anything? I mean, you're a musician. So before we started, we were talking that, you're a poet, you play guitar, you're learning drums, you're playing drums. You do all these things. Did you consider trying to join the Marine band or anything like that?
No, I guess the top prospect for me was the reserves because as I was growing up, I'd always kind of been enthralled by like the local National Guard bases and stuff. We have a lot of National Guard, Air Guard bases up here in the Northeast. And as a young Civil Air Patrol cadet, I was kind of scoping out some of those
Nice
spots. And that kind of led me to finding out about the Marine Corps Reserve. And obviously, I was always like into like the military, really like a military history aspect, and then getting into movies and books and stuff like that really made me feel like wanting to embody that warrior spirit would be like a real calling for me as like a as a citizen of the United States, and kind of taking that extra step to perform service, and whether it's for the person to the left and right of me in combat or a humanitarian kind of thing. I always knew that the Marines excelled in both. So when I found out about the Marine Reserves, I really locked in on that because I'm not really like a super athletic dude. Like I didn't really do like fucking sports and shit. I played like soccer as a little kid, but then I got into like Boy Scouts and karate, Civil Air Patrol, and was more into like lifting weights at home versus getting into like competitive sports and stuff. So when I joined, it wasn't like I was completely out of shape, but I had never really experienced that sort of tightly knit team oriented training. I was kind of more of a, smaller groups or by myself thing. So it was pretty eye opening in that I had basically two options on my plate. For me is combat camera was my first interest because outside of being a musician, I had always been very interested in media, film. So once I found out that that was not an option because that was active duty only, and I was pretty locked in on going reserves, I was like, all right, well, infantry sounds great. So
I'm
it
surprised
was,
that it's active duty only. I would figure that like there would be a reserve combat camera for. I mean, did you never have combat camera come out and document training or anything like that when you were out?
oh, dude, we had a combat camera guy like attached to our unit, but he was active.
Mm.
Yeah. So when I found out that that was the case, I was like, well, I don't want to do that. And it was basically like unit specific. Either you, yeah. So when you were signing the paperwork for, being a reservist, it was like, all right, well, here are the drill stations within the 50-mile radius of, where you're going to be coming from. It's either motor T or infantry. And I was like, well, that's my first choice is infantry at this point.
That's an
So,
easy choice. Yeah.
yeah.
Damn. That's the only. I mean, that's not the only good thing, but that is a good thing about the reserves is that you can guarantee an MOS. You can guarantee because like I was telling again, I was on that other podcast, and we were talking about it, and I was like, the Marine recruiter, for the most part, and people can correct this in the comments if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right here. The Marine recruiter can guarantee like a job field, like he can guarantee that you're artillery, but he can't guarantee that you can become a forward observer. You have to hope that you get picked for that based on the needs of the Marine Corps and your scoring and stuff like that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
and that kind of sucks.
I think you're exactly right, because that happened to me. I was originally, when I went to MEPS, I remember signing as an 0351, which I think is now a defunct MOS. It was assaultman at the time.
Yeah.
And then like right before, I think right before I went to boot camp, because I was in the delayed entry program for a while. I was in for like a year, because I signed at 17. I had my parents sign me over. Those fools.
They gave you to the government.
Yeah, they did, dude. They handed me right over. Get in that machine. And yeah, and then I switched over to 0341, which I was not super thrilled about, because I thought it was going to be super lame, but it actually ended up being pretty fun. It was an interesting MOS.
You want to explain people what that is, people that are outside the military, and kind of maybe break down the different aspects of the job?
Yeah, so the 0341, it's directly comparable to what the Army calls the indirect fire support. So at the level that we trained at, because I was going into a weapons company, we trained with I guess like what the Marine considered the heavier mortars, which at the time were 81s. 81 millimeter mortars are pretty big artillery pieces, basically, and kind of old school in that you would just drop the little artillery round down this tube, and it would hit the bottom of the tube, and this little firing pin would engage the little part of the artillery round that would detonate it, and it would go off. And so it's a pretty like archaic kind of weapon, but the way that we had the usage of math and trigonometry, and you alluded to it, like forward observers, and I got to spy a little bit behind the scenes of how that all sets up, like how like somebody will call over the radio the coordinates, and then you adjust the sights on like these little stakes, and it's wild, man. There's a whole like science behind it. And so part of what the indirect fire, how you start basically, is you start at the bottom level, in that you are part of the gun team, and the gun team usually consists of 3, 4, maybe 5 people, depending on the how many resources you have or whatever. And you start as the person dropping the rounds down the tube. It's very simple. And then you kind of have more knowledge of the system by becoming the next spot. You can be the one adjusting the sight and making the corrections on the sight. And so there's this whole team of people that are operating this weapon that is very very much used by the forward elements of the infantry units to either put flares in the air, or put down smoke, or put down explosive rounds on the enemy. So it was a really cool different part of the military that I didn't really expect, because I had been very much read up on, like, it's reading a lot of like Navy SEAL books and like SOF books and stuff like that. So to me, like, the infantry was like the 0311s, maybe a guy's got like an AT4 and like a sniper. Like, that was the infantry to me. So to like see these other parts with the indirect fire, with the forward observers, with the fire direction center, with stuff like JTAC, stuff where there's lots of like coordinating elements. I was like, holy shit, dude, this truly is a machine, man. This is the machine of war.
Fire support coordination is so cool to watch, like, especially when you start to understand what's actually happening. Like if you walk in and you look at a map and you don't really know what they're doing, it's like super confusing. It's like walking up to a board game you've never played and then and then they're talking about it and you have no idea what's happening. But if you know what's happening, you're looking at it and you're like, "Oh, they've got this whole timeline set up. So they're going to use mortars from this time to this time to let the infantry move up. And at the same time, artillery is going to be shooting at this, indirect or anti-aircraft asset so that right after that finishes, F-18s are going to come in and drop 500-pound bombs on this. And while that's happening, the second, element of the infantry is going to push up to the objective." And it's like when you see it all and you're watching it happen in real time, it's like, this is crazy. It's really interesting. It's hard to describe sometime. Like I always kind of put it back to when, as being a JTAC was kind of like being the dude in charge of an orchestra. You're up there kind of like checking the timing. It's like, all right, you're up. Okay. Artillery shooting. Okay. You over here, mortars, start shooting. Okay, bring in the air, and it's all on timing and stuff like that. It's I miss that part of it.
Yeah, and I really got to experience it because over here at Fort Devens, which is the main drill center where I drilled at, shooting mortars was it wasn't as fun as it was like out in Mojave Viper, basically out in 29 Palms, because you got to see that element of it. We got to see, okay, here's weapons companies set up with their machine gun teams and their mortar teams, and then you got the line companies moving through the valley and we're shooting over them, and so it's wild. Whereas at Devens, it was like, all right, we put the round down. And then it goes off, and that's it. And there's just trees everywhere. We don't get to see any impacts or anything like that. So I feel pretty lucky in that my reserve experience was a pretty hard and fast one. In that, from the time that I hit the yellow footprints, about 9 months later, we were in Fallujah. So it was yeah, so I did have my, leaves, my my breaks between boot camp and infantry school. But right after infantry school, I signed into the unit and they were like, "Hey, we have orders like coming next week." And I was like, "Cool, man. That's what I'm here for, I guess."
It's probably easier to, I guess, accept that when you're right out of school and stuff and you're kind of like in it. If you were like a reservist that had been like taking the next month or two off, and then you roll into it, then it'd be like, oh man, like I don't know. It seems like that's crazy. You don't hear about that on the reserve side very often. It's usually the active duty side where it's like, hey, welcome to the unit. We had a PFC when I deployed with 3-6 in 2011. I remember we got a PFC. Actually, I think he might have been a private. And he was like brand new, straight out of MOS school, literally in the fleet for less than a month, and we're in Afghanistan. And what's that like? Is it easier because you're going through all this military training and you're kind of in that environment and stuff like that? Is it easier to roll into it? Or were you kind of like, damn, I thought I joined the reserve so I didn't have to do all this?
Well, I guess I got lucky in that I caught wind of the deployment probably about a month and a half before it even became official. The power of the Lance Corporal Underground. I did not. I always kind of kept my ear to the ground for that stuff and kind of had a smart enough filter to be like, all right, well, that's nonsense, but I think there might be some truth to that. So, yeah, I had heard about it when I was down at the Infantry Battalion, training battalion for MOS school. And when we checked in, like I said, the orders were basically right there. I think I would have rather had it been that way, really, because like you said, I think it would have been tougher to kind of ease into the whole reserve once a month thing and start getting fat and lazy. I was at tip top shape. I was at peak physical shape. I'd gone through boot camp and infantry school. I would say infantry school is a bit more physically demanding than boot camp was. We were one of the last classes, I think, to do the hikes we did the 20K with the 81s, which was fucking brutal.
Yeah, I
But
bet, dude.
that's how they like to do things. Not anymore, I don't think. But either way, I'm sure they still hike the shit out of those kids. Um,
Did knowing a deployment was on the horizon while you're in school make you pay attention more? Where you're like, oh shit, this is about to be for real.
yeah, I think I think I was about as locked on as I could have been at that point. And it didn't really become real until I checked in and it was like, hey, like we are now working up to this deployment.
Mm-hmm.
And it was funny because we knew we were going to the Middle East, but here it was January in Massachusetts. There was about, 8 inches of snow on the ground, and we're trying to do like combat shoots, and we're like freezing our asses off. And I'm like, well, I know that we're supposed to be like a cold weather unit or whatever, but this doesn't feel right. But eventually we ended up in California. We ended up attaching with 1st Marine Division under Regimental Combat Team 5. So we were technically based out of Camp Pendleton. So we spent a couple weeks out of Camp Margarita doing just more mortar shoots for us. That was we were still kind of in MOS mode. And then once we got over to 29 Palms, we kind of switched over to what was called then mobile assault platoons, which was basically the equivalent of a combined action, combined anti-armor team. The platoon had vehicle assets, so we had Humvees, and we basically acted as a roving kind of, I guess, the Army equivalent, like a mechanized assault unit kind of thing. So light assets in your vehicles, light and medium assets in your machine guns. You had 240s, you had saws up in the trucks, and then everybody else was armed and stuff like that. So a little heavier hitting. So we were kind of upset to break away from our respective. The mortar platoon got switched up with all the different MOSs. They wanted to combine them so that way you'd have a little bit more of a broadened skill set. So the machine gunners and the mortars and the the assaultmen and the tow gunners, they were all mixed up into one platoon, and it made sense. Obviously we were a little bit shaken up because we didn't see it coming down the pike, but when you're at the mercy of the Marine Corps, you just gotta take it in the ass,
Do
and
what the
that's
man
how it
says.
is.
Do what the man
Yep.
says. Did you guys have tow on your turrets? Did you guys put any tow guns up?
Not on deployment, I don't think, but we definitely had we called them Broken Arrow guys because they were a detachment from an Oklahoma based unit that were specifically all tow guys. They were all
Yeah.
tow gunners. But when we deployed, I don't think we had them. I think maybe the heaviest thing we had was like a Mark 19.
Okay. Yeah, I know some units would run a tow gunner. What is it? The Saber sight or something like that? Saber system, because of the optics on it. The
Mm,
optics on it were really good, so they could like, hey, if we need to see something that's a little bit further out, the tow gunner can usually spot it pretty well because of the optics that he's using. I think it was tow. I'm pretty sure it's a tow missile.
yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. That was a little bit before our time. So like by the time we got in there, it was they had kind of locked down that sort of
Dude, I'm after
uh
you, bro. I joined in '06. I didn't
yeah.
see. We had guys with tow missiles on vehicles in Afghanistan in 2011.
Okay, that makes sense.
For
I don't
buildings, they would hit buildings if they needed to.
Yeah. Yeah. No, now that I'm thinking about it, everybody that ran all the weapons on our trucks were just machine guns and maybe a Mark 19. But even then, because I feel like at that time, like Iraq had, started out as like this, like, let's get in there, kick ass, kind of thing.
Your
And
normal invasion, yeah.
right. And then they were like, so this was after Phantom Fury when we got to Fallujah, and one of the reasons why they put the brakes on the first push through Fallujah was because it was getting to be too brutal. So, I feel like while we were there, you couldn't call in a main gun round from a tank. We were rolling with tanks. We were one of the, last units to roll with, I think it was second tanks. But you had to get like a fucking colonel's permission to set that thing off. It
Yeah.
was very there were lots of restrictions in terms of how we were to be treating this city and our we were in contact. A lot of the units were in contact quite a bit, but there were definitely a lot of rules of engagement that we had to follow as well.
You know,
So that's why I don't.
how'd the city look? This is what, a year and a half after Phantom Fury. Was it still pretty trash? Was it getting cleaned up? Like,
Oh, there were some spots that were still like rubble. Yeah, it was wild to see just like buildings with like giant holes in them from clearly, tanks shooting through them, or just bombed out buildings, collapsed roofs. Even when we were getting out of there, it was still like that, and it was surreal, man. It was absolutely surreal.
yeah, it was like, so I had a similar kind of experience going through Sangan. When you get outside of the bazaar and you get into the kind of the farmland, or kind of the village area and then the farmland, you'd see some of these huts that were bombed out, they were collapsed or whatever. It was basically like, if a hut is collapsed, if one of these mud huts is collapsed, it's because we blew it up. Like, these things don't collapse. Those things last literally forever because they're made out of mud bricks
Mhm.
and they have mud coating over them, and they withstand so much. So if you saw one that's like collapsed in, it's probably because it got bombed, and that was because of just the brutality of the area kind of required it. The fighting was that, like, I don't know. And then once you get through the main part of the fighting, kind of like what, 5th Marine, 7th Marines was there, 5th Marines. Once you get through that, then you have what we had, where it was like the rules of engagement are scaled way back because now we're trying to rebuild. We're not trying to decimate this area. We don't want to kill locals. We don't want to do anything like that. We're just trying to root out the bad guys. Let's rebuild the area and get the bazaar going. That was one thing in Sangan when we were there, is that the bazaar was really busy all the time, which it never was before that, and then it wasn't after that, because not long after we left, we were the last advisor team. ISIS came in and fucking took it over. So that was kind of the whole goal. When you were in Fallujah, was the city, did it seem like it was recovering? Were people out and about? Like, how was the atmospherics in the city?
Yeah, it was very active, and that was kind of one of the clues that we utilized when we knew bad guys were about, is the people would leave, and
Yeah.
the typical foot traffic would disappear, and because they either saw something or they heard something coming down the line. It was wild, man. I had never been to a bigger city. Well, I'd been to New York and London before, right? And those are probably two of the biggest cities you could on the planet. But I had never been to a city that was basically like in ruins, and yet to see the resilience of the people was just astonishing. And these people were just trying to live their fucking lives, whether it was slinging cell phones and cigarettes, or they had a little bakery or something like that. So it was wild to kind of see that sort of mix of, yeah, this is an active war zone, and there's bad guys crawling about for sure,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't know like who they are, what they're up to. We got a little bit of intel. We can raid here and there, but it was very much like a time where the city was starting to come back to life, and we were trying to, one, secure it, and two, help them rebuild that infrastructure. But
Mm-hmm.
obviously, that was very difficult with the politics, the Sunni and the Shia, something that I don't think anybody had a fucking clue on how to deal with, even at the higher levels. It took a long time, it seems like, for them to finally realize. Actually, after we left, they basically just started throwing money into the problem. That's when you had the Sunni awakening and things like that. So it was just kind of an interesting time in terms of, like I said, I love like military history, and I look back at that time, and I've watched a lot of things that kind of go over that time, and I've sat in on classes and studies that talk about that time period in Iraq, and to think of my own part in it is pretty interesting, but to just see it from sort of an objective standpoint, it's like, damn, that was like, I don't think anybody really had expected that situation to go down like that. That sort of time frame between like 2004 and 2007 ish in Iraq, it was just the Wild West, but with some sort of, uh, you know, bureaucratic oversight, like state oversight in terms of, whoever wanted to get their hands on stuff and make sure that the Marines weren't over there just slaughtering people. So it was an interesting time to be over there for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I bet, man, and it's tough when you're in a war zone like that where there's a active population because I mean, you definitely feel bad for them. You're like, dude, we're not. It's like I'm not here because of you. I'm not here to harm you. I'm not here. We're looking for the dudes that are planting IEDs. We're looking for the guys that are shooting at us. It's like, and we had the same thing in Sengen too. When what you were talking about, like if there was gonna something was gonna happen, you'd see like everything kind of clear out. You're like, what the hell? Like we would see. I've been on many a rooftop and yeah, I've been sitting there looking for whatever. We're stopped for whatever reason. I'm sitting on a rooftop doing my FO thing, and then suddenly I see like women, kids, and like goats. They're getting the women and the kids, and they just start, and you see them all like moving towards the main road. They're getting out of the village area, and you see kites start popping up and stuff. And that's how the Taliban would signal each other, is with kites, and then we'd see all these people start moving out, and you're like, oh shit, something's about to happen.
Hmm.
Like not these people all leaving, means something. So it's weird when that happens because you're like, oh, here we go, like what's about to happen. I would start like requesting air. I'm like, hey, something's about to happen, can I just get an aircraft on station so we can start looking around? But
Right.
yeah, man, what was your guys' mission at that point? Just to hold the city and make sure that they can rebuild, or were you actively, were you being more reactive, or were you guys how was it?
It was a mixed bag. There were definitely opportunities that we were utilized to be part of in, like, major regiment level operations and stuff. I can remember one particular operation, and we would get word, a couple days ahead of time. Hey, something big is about to go down. We're going to stop our typical schedule. Just get ready for the unusual. And there was, so like I said, we were we were associated with second tanks. So I remember one kind of like battalion regimental level operation. They had us up on, they had a secure, like a flower factory or something like that. It was like part of like the industrial area, and like it was several stories. And I was up on the rooftop with the saw, just kind of doing Overwatch and stuff. And that was very, outside of what I was typically doing. I was a driver for basically the entire 7 months. So got to do some 0311 stuff and run up in a building and man a saw for a little bit. Nothing happened. I think there's a video of me up on the roof with the saw, and I think somebody like shoots like a pen flare or something, and I like fucking fart, and I like pretty sure I like shit my pants or something. So, but
Nice.
yeah, no, it's just so we did get to do some stuff like that. There was another operation, I think it was Operation Starlight, I think it was called. But that was another lots of assets, lots of moving parts. And what we had basically done is someone in Intel found that there was a hostage situation happening, and some insurgents had taken some people and were like they had like these underground tunnels and stuff like that. So we basically kind of surrounded the area, slowly pushed in on the where these suspected insurgents were. We ended up finding them. We ended up rescuing a couple hostages, blew up a bunch of ordnance. I found a car bomb that was not being used, thankfully. I mean, it was probably about to be used, but my friend went to go take a piss, and he runs back to me. He's like, hey, I see something over there, and it was like a little Opel, like which is I don't know, comparable to like a little like a '90s, early '90s like Honda Civic, Toyota Camry, little four-door car kind of thing,
Hmm.
and it was like covered with like reeds. And so we pulled the reeds out of the way, and it was like the whole back seat had like fucking like acetylene tanks and propane tanks and shit. And we are like, okay, we're fucking leaving there.
Yeah, no shit.
Uh,
Damn.
so yeah, it was like a hideout for probably a whole little squad of dudes and I think we only found two or three bad guys. Yeah, I don't know where the rest of them were. Who cares? But there wasn't even I don't even think there was a shot fired. But as we were cleaning up and like rounding up all the ordnance, they started to shoot IDF and hit us with some mortars. But nobody got hurt or anything. It was just pretty blind fire. But yeah, so those were two events that kind of stand out in my mind as being atypical. But the standard stuff for us was patrols, QRF reactions. If the rifle companies were out and about, we would usually be on standby in case something happened. It was nice um, for them because we could. Not all of them had vehicle assets. A lot of them were out on foot. Maybe they would have one or two trucks available, but we would typically be a reaction force for the rifle companies. If they got hit, we had at least one truck that we could throw somebody in the back of and rush them off to the med center, which was, a mile and a half away or whatever. We weren't pulling in, we were not calling in 9 lines for choppers for medevacs or anything like that. We would basically load people up and rush them right to Fallujah Surgical. It was just easier that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when I was there in 2009, we had a team, it was an advisor team, and they had a guy, their corpsman actually got hit by a what is that called? The RKG-3, I believe it is. It looks like a hand grenade kind of, but it's a shape charge, and they threw it against the vehicle and it blew through the Humvee and kind of like shot the shape charge through, I think, the corpsman's wrist and knee or something like that. But they said the same thing. They're like, they drove straight from Fallujah to TQ, to the medical center on TQ. And I don't know if Camp Fallujah was a thing still in '09. And I think that's why they drove all the way to TQ. But I don't think they could have brought in a helo in the city in Fallujah itself. I don't think
Right.
that was really practical or safe.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, you might be able to land one like somewhere on the outskirts, but at that point, you're spending all this time and energy and setting up a fucking landing zone and securing it. It's like, nope, just zip on over to the closest battalion level, surgical center or whatever.
Yeah, let it go from there.
Yep.
Yeah, that's I mean, how were the IEDs at that time? Were they prevalent at all? Occasional? I mean, you're in Humvees. Did you guys not have MRAPs yet? So this is pre-MRAP time frame.
Yeah, like EOD had MRAPs at that point. Kind of like the specialized units. The IEDs were very prevalent, and that was kind of what we had expected. I would say uh, daily IED hits on anyone that was out patrolling. Um, Small arms ambushes were pretty infrequent. The battlefield started to change though, towards the end of the deployment. Um, I think it was, excuse me, I think it was August. There was a massive expulsion of prisoners from Abu Ghraib, and it was a few weeks after that time where we started to see the violence increase and the tactics change. I wonder why.
Yeah.
Because these guys were in terrorist university, basically, right? So, come September, we started seeing very, very different tactics. They started, instead of doing side shots with like artillery rounds or mortars, they would use mines or pressure plates to blow up underneath the vehicle. That's when we started taking catastrophic kills. We were out on a patrol one day, and two platoons were patrolling to do kind of disruption activity in the south part of the city. And we were just driving around and fucking, you could hear that stuff when they go off. And we came up on our sister platoon. They had hit an IE, basically a mine, basically, and three of the guys in that truck were killed instantly, and one of the guys was very badly burned. And then that same evening, our platoon hit a similar type of IED. I think it was like the third to last truck in our. We were just kind of moving across the city, and my friend's truck hit a mine, and my friend Shane lost his leg. My friend Pat lost his leg. My friend John was blown out of the turret, and then we were engaged in an ambush. So it got really interesting about a month before we had to leave, and we warned the incoming unit. We were like, "Hey guys, like first few months here, it was touch and go." Kind of, an IED hit there, kind of maybe hit a chain of IEDs somewhere else, maybe a vehicle-borne explosive or something. But by the time we started getting ready to leave and turn the city over, it was another reserve unit, 124 out of Michigan, I believe it is. I think it's out of Michigan. Um, we handed over a very deadly AO to them, and they lost a lot of Marines. I think it was like 22 casualties and like hundreds injured at that point.
Is that
But
the
yeah, it
unit
was
that had I think it was an Amtrak or some kind of vehicle get hit that had a bunch of guys in it?
that was 325, and they were
Mm.
before us, and they were in like I think they were in that AO. I don't think they were working out of Fallujah specifically, but they were definitely in the Anbar. And I remember before we were deployed, a couple guys from that unit talked to us, and they put the fear of God into us, dude. All I remember from that conversation is leaving there and being like, "Oh God, I hope I don't die."
Yeah. Yeah, which is probably a good thing. Like you got to have a realistic understanding of what you're about to get into. That sucks, man. So many of your dudes, some of your buddies lost their legs and stuff like that. Like, oh, God, man. Getting killed and losing limbs. And I was never present when a Marine got something like that happen. I was there when it happened to our Afghans. When I was an Afghan advisor, I remember a guy getting his foot blown off. I remember a guy getting shot in the stomach. Like these different things. It's like another guy I think lost his leg below his knee. And it's just so, I don't know. It's horrible to see, obviously, and it feels like such a waste. And it's crazy. Like before, like if it's your first deployment, you're like, I'll be good, or I don't know. Everyone has a little bit of fear in them, but I think most of the time it's like, what are the odds, kind of deal. And then it happens to somebody and you're like, oh, fuck. Then the odds feel significantly higher that it could happen. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, how did you and your guys react to that? To these injuries occurring, like, and you're on your way home or you're wanting to be on your way home in the next month, right? So it's like, that sucks, especially at the very end when you're like almost made it back with nothing happening.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I gotta say, there was that time period. I don't really remember a lot of it in the sense that I was just so dissociated, and just kind of on survival mode because I was fucking traumatized, by just
For sure.
that one particular day within the span of about 14 hours, I saw several people get injured. I was shot at and had to return fire, and all this crazy shit happened. And while the part of you that trains to be that warrior, that marine, that infantry, fucking killer or whatever, like that is like turned on, of course, but like I could feel my humanity just completely turn off. Like I was in just utter survival mode and hoping that I'm not the next guy. And from there, I felt this need to try and pass on the sense of urgency and danger to the next unit. And I think I wrote about it in Phantoms. There's a line in there, but I remember kind of standing around at like the base that we would operate out of, which was like about a mile and a half outside of the city.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of standing around shooting the shit with one of the new guys who was coming in, and once again, and fucking like a big dark plume of smoke comes out of the horizon, and I was like, welcome to Fallujah, man, you're gonna do great. And fucking like all I could do was just like try to pass on, like I said, that sense of urgency and the idea that your training is going to kick in, but there are also certain things that you need to be aware of in this type of environment. And there was no real good one-to-one. I mean, they tried during the workup. They did some like simulated like mount towns, urban operations, little fake towns made out of shipping containers, and might have had like some kind of shitty replica of a mosque or something like that to make it feel like you're, in the Middle East. But there was no real good one-to-one because it was just such a fucking disaster zone, really.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was a war zone, and it felt like a war zone. And so at that point, all I could really do was try to just warn these kids, like, and a lot of them they were fucking kids, Well, I was too, so I guess kids giving other kids advice. So
Yeah. Well, you grow up fast, right? I mean, you tell people I always tell people like a lot of the rules in being a JTAC and stuff are written in blood, is what we say. And it's because we don't do certain things because it could end up in your own dudes getting killed and stuff like that. And that's how the lessons learned should be. And that's what you should be passing on to people. And it's no good to sugarcoat something or downplay something. Like if someone was like, hey, IEDs are kind of bad, but they're not that big of a deal. And then you get to like Afghanistan, and suddenly you're getting multiple guys get killed with IEDs really quickly. They'll be like, "What the fuck, man? Like we should have known it was this bad. We should have done more like tourniquet training. We should have." So I think it's important to push those lessons down to people and try to. I think when you've never deployed, some people, when you get there, you're kind of in a state of denial. It's kind of like it doesn't feel real yet. Until something real happens, till something actually happens, you're just kind of like, whatever. It's almost like training, because our training is so pretty good that you do in what you're doing in country and training a lot of times. And I remember I've told this story before on the podcast, but I think it was one of our comm officers. I can't remember. One of the officers on my advisor team, we landed in Leatherneck, which is like the main base in Afghanistan. And from there, you go out to your different bases. We went to Singin. And I remember we landed in Leatherneck, and we're pulling our bags off our aircraft, and we're sitting there for a second, you're waiting to check in and all that stuff. And 3 medevac birds took off. And I was like, oh, man, that's not good. And this is my 3rd deployment. And then this lieutenant is his 1st deployment. He's like, well, maybe they're doing a training run or something. And I'm like, dude, we're in country, man. The training's over. Like, this is something happened. This is the training's done now. We're, and it was just like, I think that was a real. And then like an hour later, the base got hit with a couple rockets. And I think that kind of woke a few people up like, oh, okay, the training is over. Like, we're here for real.
They're just training rockets. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. But it's like, and that's not a dig on that guy. It's just like one of those things, like until you realize the situation you're in. I remember my first day in Marja with 3-6, a dude tried to set off a suicide vest, and it malfunctioned. He caught on fire, and the Afghans shot him and killed him. And that was like day 1. I was like, oh, it's going to be that kind of deployment. Like, I don't know. Yeah. It's a crazy concept, man. When you try to explain these lessons, I was like that on my way out of the military. I remember my last time on the OP, I sat down with the junior Marines. They were all on the OP, and I was like, hey guys, this is my last field op. Like, what questions do you have? Like, ask me anything, like, this is it. Because now, if you look at the Marine Corps today, a sergeant probably has never deployed or definitely hasn't deployed to combat. Most likely hasn't deployed to combat. You know what I'm saying? It's been so long. The wars are ending, and that's not a bad thing. But now that experience is starting to age out, right? Guys are getting out. Guys are starting to retire. And it's like, that's why I like doing these podcasts and stuff like that, because it's like we can take some of these lessons learned and record them so that we don't have to relearn them, And everybody benefits from sharing the knowledge of, this is what happened. This is the tactics that we did to counter it, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just important because it's hard to convey that seriousness to a guy that's never done it, And if I'm a junior guy and I'm looking at my sergeant, I'm like, you've never deployed either. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? It's hard to take. Now, I'm not saying it's hard to take him serious. It kind of is, but if a guy that has been, like, if you come to me and you're like, I was in Phantom Fury, this is what happened, this is why we did this, you'd be like, okay, I'm listening, because I know for sure, you were tested and you're telling me things that actually worked, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I got really lucky in that my vehicle commander was in Phantom Fury. He was with Dark Horse
Nice.
in Phantom Fury, and he heard that we were going to Fallujah, and he raised his hand because he's a fucking maniac. And
yeah. He wanted to go back, huh?
Yeah, no, I guess he had some unsettled debt, and he was awesome. He is now a police officer out in Decatur. He actually got in a really gnarly shootout situation, I think a couple of years ago. He pulled somebody over, they pulled the gun on him, they tried to shoot him in the head, and he gave him the room temperature challenge, man. It was I watched the video once and I was like, okay, don't need to see that again, man.
You saw the video of his shooting?
Yeah, there's body cam footage of it and shit. And I was just like, that was tough.
That's a tough gig, man. People hate on cops, but there are cops that should be hated on for sure, that are douchebags and like dickheads, when they don't need to be. But I think the average guy is just guy and girl are just trying to do their job and trying to make their community better. And people forget that that could happen anytime. They're walking up to a car window and someone can already have a gun out, ready to just pull the trigger as soon as they walk up. You know, that's like people. I don't think cops get enough credit. We talk about combat veterans all the time and stuff like that, but combat veterans go to combat for 7 months and come back. You know, and you know as well as I do, a lot of that can be downtime. There's a lot of like boredom in combat and stuff. And cops go out every day. There's the training is the job. You're out there doing it every day. It's like that's such a gnarly gig. I can imagine the stress for something like that is just off the charts.
Yeah, and I think that's why I didn't want to do it. And I was like, yeah, I got out of the Marine Corps because it was fucking stressful, and why would I want to do that? So yeah, no, I definitely give those people credit. My mom is a police officer, and give her tons of credit. And you know, all my friends that are cops are, for the most part, they're not shitty. So you know, it's
most
one of
them
those
are
things.
cool.
Yeah, most of them are fine, and
they're a reflection of society, just like the military. There's going to be bad people in there. Every job has bad people.
Yeah, and I think that there are, when you have bureaucratic elements, there's going to be levels of corruption, right? I think it's just they kind of go hand in hand. And I'm not like a poli-sci person or anything like that. I'm speaking anecdotally, in that I think that there is corruption that's going to happen. That there's going to be people that fall through the cracks and take advantage of things. And, you know, I think I said this the other day in a writing group that I was in, of course, violence is going to be exacerbated and there's going to be more bad people in the world because there's just 8 billion people in the world. So it's one of those things, you start adding the numbers in and it's like, yeah, of course you're going to have some bad folks in there. And is the system perfect in terms of policing? No, I don't think it is. But how do you change that? I think that's a long, arduous sort of process that isn't going to happen overnight. And is the answer to like rip all their funding away? No, but is it that, you know, is the system like working? No, I don't think that it is either. So it's kind of a weird thing.
I don't know. I think it works decently well. I think we don't give enough credit to the law. Certain areas are better than others, obviously, right? And my take on it is like people complain about cops where they are like, oh, they're uneducated. It takes more time to become a barber than it does to become a police officer. You know, it takes more of this. And it's like, well, you can't require them to have more skills and know more things and have more abilities while also saying you're going to pay them less. Like it's skilled labor or it's not. You know what I'm saying? If you want to pay them almost nothing, then you're going to get what you pay for. Now, do you want to have a police department that is well-funded, well-staffed, everyone has time to do training? That's the other thing too, is if you don't have enough people, how can you expect these police officers to go and do extra training to learn new things, learn new skills, when they don't even have enough people to cover, you know, patrols and stuff like that? So, it's a weird. The problem is, like you said, when you look at the numbers game of it, you know, if 0.1% of them are bad, well, look at that 0.1% compared to 300,000 police officers or whatever the number is in the United States. That's still a bunch of people that are bad, you know, within the system. And it's unfortunate because the thing with a police officer is they're like the only people that can violate your constitutional rights. You know what I'm saying? And they can detain you. And that's what I mean by that. Not that they can make you do something that you're not allowed to do, but they can detain a person, which is a violation of your constitutional rights, but they have they're allowed to do it because the law says they can. You don't want people with bad intentions to have that kind of power. Unfortunately, it happens. I think the institution of body cams in a lot of places has done the opposite of what activists said they would do, where they said that it would reveal cop corruption and all this. And I think in some cases it has. We have seen corrupt police officers. We have seen negative things, but I think in the most part, we've seen how professional a lot of police officers are. You know what I'm saying? You don't, those videos don't go viral. The normal interaction where the police officer is very professional and has good interaction with the public. The only ones that go viral are the ones where it's like a meltdown, or someone screaming at them. And there's a ton of those. Like that's the other thing. We see how people treat police officers. And if you walk up and they're just immediately like shitheads to them, it's like, well, what did you expect was going to happen? This whole situation was completely overblown. So it's a weird game for sure. It's kind of like military funding. People argue for and against. I'm for both increasing the funding for the military and increasing the funding for police, only because if you want high quality individuals, then you should be giving them high quality salaries. You know what I'm saying? And they're out risking their lives every day. They should be paid in a manner that kind of reflects what they're doing. But I also think that there should be requirements that make it hard so that not everybody just gets into it. Like if I'm going to pay you $100,000 a year to be a cop, well, then I want you to know some jujitsu. I want you got to have, jujitsu training. You got to have some kind of understanding of the law itself, like taking law classes, not just how to arrest somebody in policing, but actual law theory and things so you understand the law better. There's like, those are the kind of things. Just like if we increase the funding for the military, I'd be totally fine with shedding that 10% just to have more high quality people. You know what I'm saying? Because I think that's a better, I don't know. I think that's overall, I think that would be better for us, but what do I know? I'm just a regular guy.
A former action guy.
I'm a former action guy with an opinion.
That's it.
Well, they're giving a pay raise to junior Marines or junior troops, like 15% this year.
Wow.
This next year, they're getting 15%, and then I think the E5 and above crowd's getting like a 10% raise.
Nice.
So that's cool, and I think that should be, I don't like that the military is seen as a no other choice kind of profession. When there's so many people, as well as I do, there's so many people that join not because they had to, but because they wanted to, not because that they're in a position where they had to. One of my first platoon sergeants was a infantry guy, and he had a bachelor's degree. He was a sergeant. He had a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. He got bored working at a cubicle or whatever it was he was doing, and was like, "Hey, I'm going to join the Marine Corps for an enlistment, and then use the benefits to go back and get my master's degree." And I was like, that guy didn't have to do it. So.
Yeah, and I met people like that in the reserves who walked away from, six-figure jobs to go on a deployment and possibly not make it back to their six-figure job or whatever. And it's wild, the reserves had this very diverse group of people from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
Bachelor's degrees, lots of firefighters, lots of police officers, HVAC repair people. So, we would have our tents, air conditioner go down, and, here's Chris fucking running over using his years of HVAC repair knowledge to get us back up and comfortable, and so we could sleep between patrols. So it was pretty cool to kind of see how the backgrounds of the reservists were.
Yeah. The only issue, so my first deployment, I deployed as a mechanic to Iraq, to Al Taqaddum. And the way it worked when I was with Maintenance Battalion was that they would take like a group of us from Maintenance Battalion, like a small group, to be like, hey, 20 or 30 guys, hey, you're going on this next Iraq rotation. And then they would attach us to a group of reservists that were all put together, multiple reserve units put up guys and built a unit. And then we would all together deploy. And there was like a big difference between some of the reserve units. Like some of the guys were really good and squared away and like knew their job and kind of, they just did their thing. And then there were other guys that didn't know anything. Like it was like, and I understand, and you can kind of talk to this. There's only so much time to actually do your job in the reserves because you got to do all your annual training. You meet weekend a month, right? 1 week a year, and you're doing annual training. You're doing, all these other things that are required of you, plus your MOS. So what's your take on interacting with other reserve units? You kind of feel like that's the same way? Like some are better than others, obviously?
Yeah, and I think it's that way too between active duty units, right? Some
For
are
sure.
probably, more honed away, and they probably even within those units, there's probably some companies and platoons and squads that are more squared away and stuff. Um, I didn't really interact with any other reserve units other than the 124 who came and relieved us, but there was definitely um, sort of a mixed bag of professionalism in within 125, and I think uh, particularly within weapons company there was a lot of it's kind of loudmouth troublemaker types, and I think that it bode well for where they were at. But I mean, as far as knowledge goes, there were definitely Marines who had their shit together, and I think I was pretty lucky. I was, a private, a PFC or whatever. I don't think I got PFC until I was in Iraq. Um, but so when we did our workup, we did a division level school uh, using mortars out in California. This was prior to Iraq, and I had the real privilege of working with one of our NCOs who was really hot shit at his job.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was able to kind of take my knowledge just coming out of ITB. And, he and I worked well together. We had a couple other guys on our team. And so we ended up getting like the best gun team or whatever in that 2-week training evolution or whatever it was. And he unfortunately ended up getting killed by a sniper. And it was just kind of one of those things where, yeah, for sure there were people who knew their job more than others. I think at one point, um, after I had gotten out, somebody told me they were like, yeah, all that stuff that our platoon sergeant was telling us, like about like laying down like fucking some kind of thing or whatever. He was like, he didn't know what he was talking about, and I was like, okay, that makes sense. But I think that the Marines do a pretty good job of making sure that if you're going to be deployed to a forward area like we were, that we had a lot of active duty experience in our ranks. Like I said, my vehicle commander was a Phantom Fury vet. We had other kind of NCOs with combat experience scattered throughout the battalion. I think we had a couple officers that had at least 1 or 2 deployments under their belt, kind of scattered throughout the battalion. So we had a big budget from what I heard after the fact, and we had real luck in terms of being able to either attract or recruit guys who wanted to go to Iraq, maybe for the first or the second time. And so that was utterly valuable, because I would imagine that if you had taken all of us green dudes who had never done a combat deployment, I think it would have been a little different. I think it
Yeah.
would have been much different, actually.
Yeah, you're relearning some lessons learned, the little things. It's like the little things that can make life a little bit more comfortable or easier when you're in a situation like that. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense though. I mean, you get a lot of guys that are active duty that decide to get out and are like, "Hey, I don't want to hang up completely. I'll go in the reserves. I'll do that." And then the reserves are interesting because you do get a good mix of stuff. I think it's kind of weird. I think one issue we had with some of our reservists were, like you said, some of these guys they work for the government. Some of them are like lawyers. Some of them are police officers. Like there's a little bit of everything. And it was always kind of weird for some of them when we would all be together and some of these guys, like if you're a junior Marine, some of these guys were used to like hanging out with like the corporals and sergeants because they're all reservists together. They stay in the same hotel when they're going, for their weekend drill and all that stuff. They're like all buddies and everything. Whereas on the active duty side, like that's not really happening. And when we're all together, and then you see them doing that, you see them like going to their like a PFC or Lance Corporal, like hanging out with a sergeant or something like that, or it was just the way they would interact. You're like, what are you guys doing? Like, what the hell? What is this? And there was some like we butted heads some because we just didn't do that. You know what I'm saying? Like a Lance Corporal's not going to go talk to a staff sergeant. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
You're going to talk. You're going to go through the chain of command. You're going to talk to your corporal or your sergeant, and then the word will get passed along. But it was just like a weird. I remember being a corporal and I told this Lance Corporal to take the trash out. And he's like, "You fucking take the trash out." And I was like, "What?" I was like, "What the fuck did you just say to me, dude?" And it was just like, it's not necessarily their fault because that's how they were, came up. But you see that in different units, how different units would interact like that and how comfortable they were with each other. It was varying. So it was always fun, but I considered the reserves. But when I got out, I was like, you know what? I just don't want to do. I feel like if I do the reserves, it's going to be more of the things I just want to get away from. The stupid annual training, the nonsense, the leadership that may be inept, having you do stupid stuff just because that's the way it is or whatever. I was just like, I just don't want to be, and I was going to go to college and I was like, what are the odds that I get activated and I can't finish school, or I have to delay school. So I don't know, but I think it's a good option for a lot of people. I actually recently told my son about it. Specifically because I was like, if you wanted to join the Marines and you wanted a specific job, you'd have to join the reserves,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, man. So you get back from that first deployment, when you guys come back from a deployment, like a reserve unit comes back and then are you guys still active? How does that work? Because we're all, on the active duty side, even if you get part of a BLT, you become part of a BLT, like a battalion landing team, or like us, we were attachments with 3-6. We come back from deployment, we're still attached to 3-6. We still go in to work every day for like a month or so, and then we get sent back to our other units and everything. You guys are coming back as one whole unit, but it's not like active duty where you're all there centrally located anyways. Everyone lives in all kinds of different places. So how does that work post deployment?
Yeah, we demobilized out at Pendleton. So we basically came out of Iraq into Pendleton, kind of spent some time doing like work down, offboarding kind of training and stuff like that. And then we all came back to Massachusetts. And because Fort Devens is kind of the centrally located, that's where the headquarters in weapons is. We went from Cali to our respective drill centers, which for mostly everybody was Devens. So yeah, and then from there it was like Christmas time. So we, got a couple weeks off, and I think we even had a couple, for those of us who had just come off the deployment, we had a couple months off. We didn't have to drill for a couple months. And then we basically kind of picked up the drill schedule, which was typically like a Friday through Sunday kind of thing. So the demobilization was pretty straightforward. It didn't feel like it was anything unusual in that, we all basically kind of got on our flights, all landed in Pendleton, spent a few weeks there doing, VA training and don't kill yourself training and
Do your families see you in California? Can they come out to California, or did you wait until you guys got back to your actual reserve centers?
Yeah, no, they met us on the East Coast. Yeah, so they had to wait until we got to Devens or wherever. Yeah. So, but that was really bittersweet. It was really nice to have that kind of, we're back at home, we're seeing our families. So that was really nice. Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool, man. Yeah, it's always fun coming back. I don't know how you guys did it, but like, I don't know. It's just the whole event. Like, you don't want to, you're ready to be done with it though. You're like, I'm ready to just get away from everything. Like, I don't know. Our battalion sergeant major with 3-6 had us march back. We formed up as a battalion and parked the buses one place and then marched. And I was like, come on, man, can we just release this to the families? But then we did it, and I was like, okay, that was probably pretty cool for the families. I bet the families thought that was super cool that we all marched up and then got released to them that way, rather than just running off the bus kind of deal. But yeah, man, those feelings of leaving and coming home are crazy. It's like an emotional roller coaster. I bet it kind of sucks that if you're in California and you can't see your family yet, you're like, fuck, man. Like, I'm sure some of the families are frustrated. Like, why can't we see you? Like, we're already, you're in country or you're in the U.S., blah, 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 kind of deal. Because people obviously want to get back together. But I think it is important for guys to have a decompression period where they can kind of just, kind of talk about stuff and everything like that. I think that's more important. Like you mentioned, all those classes that you have to take, the VA classes, you have to do like the little cognitive tests and all these different things. Those are important, but I think the biggest thing is just being able to like decompress for a little bit and kind of BS with your dudes. Because for you guys specifically, when you go back, you're getting released to your families and stuff, and there's really no other military around, right? At least active duty guys. We get released to my family. Well, I'm going to be back in on Tuesday and see all the same guys again,
Right. Yeah, no, I was back living with my parents, dude. I was 19 years old. Like, I did not go back to the bricks. I went back to my parents' house, and I was sleeping in the same room that I grew up in.
Did that feel weird? Was that weird? Like, just coming back, and now you're like, what is life now?
Yeah, it was like I walked through like a portal or something like that. It was very bizarre. But yeah, no, I actually, I'm glad that you mentioned, spending some time with the boys or whatever, because that's what I did. We demobbed in Pendleton, and we spent a few days down in San Diego. We went to the zoo, and I think that was really the point that I realized. I was like, damn, it feels good to be back. Like, it feels good to be back in our society and hanging out with friends. And that was kind of one of the first times too, where I realized that, like, I think we were all at like a restaurant, it was like 30 of us or whatever. And like, they started bringing up some memories and talking about stuff. And I just like broke down in the middle of the restaurant, like had to like walk out, one of my friends came outside, he like consoled me and stuff. And that's when I started to realize, I was like, I'm taking a lot of this shit back with me. And it pretty much immediately started to see some counseling and things like that when I got home and kind of settled into the VA system and stuff like that too. So yeah, it was wild, man, to like be like sleeping in the barracks out at 5th Marines, and then like 2 weeks later I'm like sleeping in the little twin size bed in my childhood bedroom. I was like, what the fuck, dude? What is this?
That is crazy, dude. That's like what that's the extreme version of what I always tell people. It's like getting out for a lot of people. One day you're at work and you're in the military, and then the next day you're back home in your hometown and there's no one to talk to. That's like the extreme version of that. It's a little bit more manageable, I think, if you're just coming from like garrison life, working normal, to that. But going from like literal combat situation where within 2 months before that, dudes were actually dying in front of you or getting shot or injured, or like, that's a lot to. It's for people that haven't been there. It's kind of hard to like, things that you don't worry about here at all, over there you're like hypersensitive to, like noises and stuff. I used to be super jumpy when I came back, and it was mostly because our fucking Afghans would shoot this I said RKG-3 earlier. It was this recoilless rifle. And you never knew when they were going to shoot it, and they were super sketchy with it when they were doing it, handling the munitions and stuff, and it was always like, and that was what I think made me most jumpy when I first came back. I'd hear a loud noise, and I'd be like, oh, and for a while it was pretty bad. When I got back from singing, it was pretty bad for a little while. I would jump at everything. I was just constantly kind of like that. But it's just like those little things like that. Like it didn't actually bother me, like that I was like kind of jumpy. It was just like more annoying than anything. It was like, God, I wish I would stop. You know, going from something like that to straight like sleeping in my hometown bed, you know, my childhood bed would be a mind fuck for sure. That's good that you saw that you're like, hey, maybe I should talk to somebody, and you got counseling. You know, how does the VA system work for reservists? Do you think it's robust enough? Do you think it's like, how's it working out for you?
I've had a really good experience in that the systems around here are pretty highly rated. I live closer to the Providence, Rhode Island system, so that's the one that I've basically been out of. But even the ones up in Boston are pretty well received. So yeah, I think I've been pretty lucky in that. And I was talking to my mother too. My grandfather is a Navy CB veteran, Korean War era. He never deployed to Korea, but you know, he was deploying while that war was going on, but he never stepped foot in Korea. Regardless, like we've just now kind of started to get him into the system, and that's the VA, the healthcare system is the only one I've ever known, basically. Like I signed up when I was 20, and I've gotten all my treatments and stuff there. Like I said, very 90% good experiences. You know, there have been a couple times here and there where communication didn't get through, or I showed up to an appointment, I didn't know where the hell I was going, or, you know, just kind of, you know, we weren't on the same page in terms of like booking an appointment or something. But I've never nobody's ever like left me for dead in the middle of an operating room or something like that. So I've had very, very good experiences, and
that's good.
Yeah, and honestly, like the mental health care for me has been, it's been a journey, and I think that's kind of part of what you have to look at it as. It's a long road. It's not going to be this sort of, yeah, man, I'm gonna do fucking 2 years of CBT and I'll be squared away. It's like, no, you should probably invest more time into probably unpacking not only like your military stuff, but probably also like childhood stuff and other kinds of just kind of the knots that we kind of weave in our life, in that we may not even realize are kind of holding us back until you talk about it, or you journal about it, or you have some wild epiphany or something. So
I think journaling is a good outlet for a lot of people, because a lot of people don't want to talk to a counselor or a psychiatrist or something like that, you know, but they need to get things out. I think getting a book and just writing some stuff down every once in a while is definitely a good idea. For me, the podcast is a good outlet for mainly military stuff, obviously, but I can sometimes we'll talk about current events or something, but it's like a good way to like just talk to other people and kind of understand perspectives. And honestly, it helps me like realize how lucky I am, you know, because some guys had it way worse than you're talking about guys losing legs and, you know, getting killed and stuff like that. Like I said, I was never in the presence. I've had friends that have gotten killed. I've never been there when a Marine was shot, blown up or something like that. Again, I've been there when the Afghans, but it's a little different when it's like one of your dudes, you know, that you know and you hung out with and everything. I don't know. Having an outlet is important. And that's why we were talking before we started recording about how I think it's cool that you're into the arts, you know, you use music, you know, you do like guitar, drumming, you do poetry, that kind of thing that's a good outlet, you know. And I try to reinforce to guys that are getting out, like telling them like, you got to find something that you are passionate about, you know, because when you're in the military, especially if you're in like combat arms, it becomes your identity. It becomes like because you don't want to be bad at it, and you understand how serious it is, you know, how these actual lives can be on the line here. You get fully engulfed in it, and you know, you got to find something when you get out that you probably won't ever find anything that you'll be that involved in like the military is, because it's, you know, every part of your day, going to work out, going to lunch, going to work, going to, you know, everything. You're hanging out with the guys and stuff like that. But you got to find something that drives you, you know, something to have a passion about. And I think that's great. I like doing photography. I like doing the podcast. I do graphic design work for some people. And I think it's a good way to, like, I don't know, man, you know, cope with the real world, I guess. You know, this is how normal people act.
Yeah, no, Dead Reckoning Collective has done this thing for the last few years where every January they have a handwritten challenge, and it's basically on their Instagram page. They post a prompt every day for those of us who are interested in just journaling and just handwriting that based on that prompt. And I've always done journaling. That's always kind of been part of my own sort of introspection. That coupled with the professional objectivity of a counselor, somebody who knows how to kind of navigate those spaces and knows the sort of right questions to ask, the sort of things that are going to get you to have those aha moments, to have those doors kind of unlocked. That's been super helpful for me. So I think, like anything else, you know, we talked about like coordinated fire and stuff earlier. Like, you need to have that kind of toolbox. You need to have that MAGTF of you know, healing and I don't even think you have to be somebody who is like, in our situation, you know, Marines or, you know, combat vets or whatever. Like, everybody's going to have their own hangups in life. Life is challenging and it's full of adversity. And I think, especially now, you know, people need to be really resilient. And there's this idea of having the sorts of that toolbox of things that are just going to kind of keep you at peace and just kind of keep you focused on the things that you're passionate about. And for me, it is writing and music and art and stuff like that. And so, yeah, no, I think that there's all kinds of ways that folks can kind of take their, you know, their monkey chatter and their nonsense and the stuff that's keeping them down and hurting them, and just kind of channeling that in a way that's going to be not only productive for them, but maybe also productive for society.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it's good. And I've also had pretty good, I don't really ask a lot from the VA. I think the most I've had is when I've had a back issue, I've gone in and almost immediately recommended someone out in town for me, you know, and then obviously paid for it because they didn't have like physical therapy available or something like that. I'm in San Diego, so it's pretty robust here as well. My biggest complaint has been every time I go in for an annual checkup, I have a different doctor. You know, like in the real world, you have a family doctor or something like that. You see that same dude or that person or woman or whatever every year, and they kind of get to know you. And in the VA, it's like every time I've gone in, I've been assigned a different doctor, and it's like, oh, okay. And I don't know if it's something where they're moving up in the system or how it works, but I'm like, that's kind of a bummer. But I'm lucky enough where I don't have, you know, I have my own issues, like I said, my back, my shoulders, and stuff like that. But I haven't had to have like ongoing, you know, therapy or rehabilitative things. Like, you know, some guys get out that are injured and they end up having surgeries for years after they get out because it's just ongoing issues with the injury that they had. Luckily, I've never had to deal with anything like that. So I understand how if you live in a more rural area, you know, it's a little bit more difficult because you have to travel to a VA center and stuff like that. But from my understanding, the same program that allowed them to recommend a physical therapy place out in town for me is available as what they're using now, where if you're like in a rural area, they will recommend like services at a local hospital and pay for it, which I think that's smart. You know what I'm saying? Like, because if you're an elderly person, you know, you're talking about these Korean War veterans, Vietnam War veterans, you know, they can't travel an hour and a half to go get a checkup or something like that. You know, a lot of times it's just, it's not possible. So there are ways that it needs to be improved, but there are ways that when I got out, I worked at an advertising agency, and we were talking about medical insurance. I was like, I go through the VA. I don't need to worry about it. But that was the first time it kind of made me see how much people are paying for medical coverage. And I was like, holy shit. Like, you're paying like $400 a month, $500 a month, or way more depending on how big your family is and your coverage. But I was just like, damn, man, I'm glad I don't have to worry about that. Like, I've never even really, having gone from the military where obviously it's medical coverage is free to having VA coverage after I got out. I'm like, damn, that's something. It was hard to relate for a while. I'm like, what are they complaining about? But then when I saw the actual cost that some of my fellow workers were paying, I was like, damn, that's crazy, man. Here's a question. How does that work in the reserves? Do you have TRICARE while you're in the reserve so that you can go to any facilities? How does that work?
Yeah, I can't even remember. It's been so long now that I really was only like an active reservist for like a couple of years, and then I got out.
Like, if you're sick, who do you go see? Do you have your like hometown doctor and it's covered by the military insurance, or do you have to find a base or a VA place or something like that to get coverage?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I would have gone to the VA. Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, this has been interesting, man. I really, I want to say I appreciate you coming on. Where can people find your stuff at?
Best way for people to find out, what I'm up to, probably www.benjaminfortier.com. Fairly active on Instagram, but at the Benfo Creates. I got a couple pages on social media, but I think that's probably the best one. Yeah, I think really anytime that I get to be involved with something like this is just a great opportunity for me to just chat with other folks. And like you said, it's always just an opportunity to get some of those spots massaged that we don't always have the ability to, because I mean, when people get out, they don't always kind of have that community that they're able to lean into a little bit. So, it's always good to have this kind of outlet and to just chat about this kind of stuff. And I appreciate you having me on today. It's been great.
Yeah, man. And you're also part of the 125 Association, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I'm a board member of the 125 Association. I basically kind of run the website, do some of the tech stuff behind the scenes. That's a very small group of 125 veterans, some Gulf War veterans, some Afghanistan veterans, but majority of us are the Fallujah vets. And we have a long, well, not long though, but a short history of helping out with the reunions. We've done that since 2016. We had our 10-year reunion in 2016 for the 10-year Fallujah reunion. And then kind of from there, we've had the opportunities to host other smaller reunions. Our last big reunion was up in Maine, in Portland, Maine. Had the opportunity to meet Rudy Reyes. He came out. He was one of our guests of honor, along with Major General Jerry Humble, who's our other guest of honor. So it's been part of our mission to help Marines by reuniting, throwing small reunions, big reunions together, because we started to see the unfortunate side effect of not having that. Like I said, we were just talking about community and not having the outlets for Marines to be Marines and FMF sailors to be FMF sailors, and just kind of to gather and talk and eat, drink, be merry, to kind of share those memories. And we've had a lot of really great assistance from Semper Fi Fund, which I now believe is Semper Fi America's Fund, because they're branching out and helping other branches. Yeah, no, they're not just Marine base anymore, which is cool, which is good for them. but they've been a huge, yeah, it's actually America's Fund here. So
Oh, okay. So change the
yeah,
name completely. I've only heard good things about Semper Fi Fund, so I guess now America's Fund. So, I mean, if that's something people are interested in checking out, they should do that. That's awesome, though, man. Getting people together is very important because we all speak a different language, right? And it's easier to kind of relate and stuff. So that's good stuff. Yeah, I guess that's really it, man. I really appreciate it. People can check out my stuff. jkramergraphics.com is my website. Former Action News and Former Action Guys is my Instagram. And that's it, dude. Really appreciate it.